despite tons of obstacles, despite what I went through in my childhood in terms of, racism, bullying, I also received a lot of support as well. So I'm just grateful that, the odds weren't in my favor, but it came to fruition.
Welcome everyone, I'm Anson Carter and you're watching Hockey Culture. We're trying to change the culture of hockey one interview at a time, and today we have the pleasure of having Harnarayan Singh from Hockey Night Canada Punjabi. Harnarayan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Anson. I've been looking forward to chatting with you. Glad to be on.
And for all of our fans that aren't familiar with your work, I'm going to have you give me an example of
Well, 2016 Stanley Cup Final, and Nick Bonino was on the HBK line with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that line really drove it for them that season, despite them having obviously Crosby and Malkin, but Carl Hagelin and Phil Kessel on that line, and Nick Bonino scored some huge goals. And I had made a mistake in my notes. I had written Bonino. I normally write out the lineup just so I can kind of visualize it. And for left wing, center, and right wing, I had written Bonino down for all three positions. So that was kind of stuck in my head. And he scored a bunch of big goals. And there you have it. The adrenaline was pumping, and it came out, as you said, Bonino, 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 Nick Bonino.
That is awesome.
I'm really thankful and thrilled that, the Pittsburgh Penguins fans, but not only them, but pretty much hockey fans everywhere really appreciated that. And it was a great moment. We were invited, my colleagues and I, to the Stanley Cup Parade in Pittsburgh. And who would have thought you have a program based in Canada for, a diverse community. And had it not been for the sport of hockey, we wouldn't have been able to be in front of 400,000 fans celebrating the Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh, of all places, who, from the time when we walked the streets there in 2016, there weren't very many South Asians, let alone turbans. So it was pretty cool to be there and celebrate with them.
I mean, that passion's awesome. We always talk about the players having the passion on the ice, but listening to games, to having our broadcasters call the game. We have the great Doc Emmerich here on our network with NBC Sports. So having you call it that same kind of passion and intensity, as a hockey fan now myself, I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, I would say that as a broadcaster, there's nothing more that brings you closer to the game than when you have not only fans, but players themselves appreciate your work. And so we experienced that in Pittsburgh then, and then now to hear that from you, that means a lot, Anson. I appreciate it.
And we're talking off camera with one of our producers, Kevin Brown, and even Keisha was listening to the conversation. We're talking about your background. Like, I'm not a fan of people trying to one-up me the background. I've got the Anson Carter Ace action figures behind me right over my shoulders here. I'm seeing some pretty good pics of you. I see the great one over your head there. I think I see Sidney Crosby there, a couple of jerseys. Talk about the background that you have. There's some pretty nice stuff you have.
Yeah, actually, my wife and my sister, one year on my wedding anniversary, my wife wanted to surprise me with, putting together a wall in our house, a memory wall of some of the journey it's my 13th season with Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi. So it all started with Gretzky, and I grew up in the 80s in Alberta when Wayne was winning his Stanley Cups with the Oilers, and so I've got a number of some awards, and you might even see my license plate. If you come to Alberta and you see this license plate 99, that's my vehicle. And so I've got a bunch of things. I mean, we've been so fortunate. The New York Times featured us, and the jersey collection you mentioned. That's something if my wife has a lot of purses and shoes, I can get away with a lot of jerseys, right? So I've got everything from like a Forsberg, Sweden jersey to Paul Kariya when he was with the Avalanche. I remember when Kariya and Solani joined forces to team up on Colorado. When I was a young kid, I was like, this is like what a dream team and set up. Unfortunately, it didn't really come to fruition as what they were imagining. But I've accumulated a ton of jerseys, and a ton of stuff. And of course, a lot of the memories here on the memory wall have to do with that time in Pittsburgh in 2016 and beyond as well. And you mentioned Doc Emmerich. I had the chance to meet him as well, and great guy, and of course, legendary broadcaster in our industry.
I can only imagine if you ever have a yard sale, I am making sure I'm the first guy standing in line, or if you're going to be putting anything on eBay, make sure you highlight your boy because you've got some pretty nice stuff over your shoulders.
I'll let you know.
I want to bring it back, though, to your upbringing back in Alberta, small town. How did you use hockey to assimilate into the community? Because I can imagine there wasn't that many South Asians living in the community at the time.
No, and I'm the youngest of 4 kids and the only boy. And growing up in the 80s, it was very unique because of the fact that the small town of Brooks, the population was just 10,000 people and very, very few visible minorities. Like I can count them on one hand. And because I was wearing a turban, and my family were vegetarian, and we speak Punjabi at home as well, and listen to different music. So there's so many different, subtle differences. But when you go into a classroom and you're trying to fit in and you're trying to make friends, it can kind of become a bit of a challenge. And I became a hockey fan because of the fact that during the 80s, the Oilers and the Flames were both such great teams. My sisters were already hockey fans. And I grew up learning the history of my own family, that my great-grandfather came in 1907, over 100 years ago, to Canada. And, the challenges he faced, the racism that he faced. And then my parents immigrated from India in the 1960s, and they were teachers, and they grew up in that small town of Brooks, and kind of the different challenges they had to overcome from, in our community, we didn't have the right to vote or, to own land originally when my great-grandfather came. And then when my parents came here too, it was so challenging for them just to kind of make these connections with people, just because there was so much kind of unawareness of what a turban was, or there was all these sorts of assumptions also being made. And I've been able to reflect on it growing up now. But one thing I did notice when I was growing up, and it really helped me, was the game of hockey. And my kindergarten classroom picture, I'm wearing a Wayne Gretzky sweater, and he had just been traded to the LA Kings. And it became this conversation starter. I don't think I knew it at the time, but, eventually when I got to grade 4, 5, 6, junior high, all of my relationships, my rapport with my teachers and classmates, I really feel my situation would have been drastically, completely different had it not been for the game of hockey. So many friends I made because of hockey, and all of those connections were about last night's game, betting on playoffs, whether it was for a bag of chips or a can of pop, whatever it may be, and eventually winning hockey pools and just becoming obsessed with the game in terms of my hockey card collection. And my dad being a math teacher and a PhD in math, and he used to actually go to Edmonton to help write the grade 12 diploma exams. And so, him being a math nut, he was worried that his word was, "You're making your brain into this encyclopedia of hockey. What are you going to do with it?" And so I knew I wasn't a great skater. My family, we weren't into skating, but I loved ball hockey and I loved the NHL. And so I kind of right away latched on the idea of becoming a broadcaster. And that was my goal. That was my dream. And I loved how, people could be the voice of the game. And, in here in Canada, Bob Cole was our big-time play-by-play guy, legendary, and now retired. And then Ron McLean, still the host of Hockey Night in Canada here. And so I grew up watching them, and I wanted to be a part of that. But as I kind of told people this is my dream, and as you know, Anson, any kid, when kids are growing up, people ask them, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I didn't know any better. I just said, I want to be a hockey commentator, right? But as I grew up, Anson, there was so many different situations where people would caution me and say, "Harnarayan, you got to be realistic. Nobody looks like you on TV. The chances of you getting on TV are so slim." And, in the South Asian community, it's like, okay, doctor, lawyer, engineer, like you got to focus on those. But, I went for it. I'm so grateful. I feel so blessed and lucky to say that, it happened for me. And despite tons of obstacles, despite what I went through in my childhood in terms of racism, bullying. I also received a lot of support as well. So I'm just grateful that, the odds weren't in my favor, but it came to fruition.
I mean, what was your reaction when people would say to you, Harnarayan, the sport is not for you? I mean, I received those same kind of comments as well when I was growing up, where I would tell people that I want to play the National Hockey League and they just laugh at me. And it got to the point where I would never talk about hockey with people. I would just talk about playing basketball or playing football or playing baseball, other sports that I played, and I played at a very high level, because I wouldn't get that same feedback or that same negative pushback. What was your response to those same people when they would say to you, Harnarayan, maybe not hockey, maybe think about some other sport?
Yeah, I think every time that happened, it would really make me, first and foremost, if I reflect back on it, I would feel sad. I would also, I'm a talkative person, as you can tell from my long-winded answers, but I would become more quiet. And I think my parents, my sisters, they noticed, these moments when I was feeling discouraged. I'm very grateful that they gave me the encouragement to at least give it a shot. And so, early on, I remember even our family doctor in the town of Brooks was saying that, you got to be realistic. But the crazy thing, Anson, is that when I went to broadcast school, I actually finally decided that I'm going to regret it if I don't give it a shot. And in my small town of Brooks, I was able to volunteer at the radio station, and them opening the door in the small town of Brooks on Q13 radio, the station manager there, John Petrie, allowing me to volunteer and giving me some airtime on the radio to do high school sports reports, that gave a glimmer of hope that, hey, if these guys are willing to do it, maybe somebody else will be willing to give me a shot. So I end up in broadcast school for university at Mount Royal in Calgary, and some of my professors, some of my teachers, and I don't want to put them down. They were great. They helped me. I learned a lot. But one of the comments that I received was, maybe you should think about behind the scenes. They were trying to, in a way, caution me, protect me, be realistic. And another thing I got was that, hey, well, you're really good at news as well. Maybe the world might not be ready for you to be on sports, but maybe on news you might have a chance. So I was actually I was surprised to hear that. And when I got those comments, it really made me think, and I developed now, I just recently, just because of everything that's gone on in the United States and the protests we've seen, I've been reflecting on it more, learning more about every different community and what they've gone through. And I realize now that actually put a doubt in my mind and my way of thinking that has lasted until today. I'm never able to be confident, because I always have this doubt that I'm not sure if I'm actually good enough to do this or not, because that's what I was told growing up, or I'm not sure if I belong. I am so grateful that, my current company, Sportsnet, or whether it was CBC, I did receive a lot of support, and we have made tons of progress, Anson. That's one thing I want to say. Since I was a kid till now, I mean, having representation on TV is important. We've seen a big difference. There's still a lot more that needs to be done. But to answer your question concisely, it really did make me reflect. And I was worried about it, but I still received enough encouragement to at least give it a shot.
Is it doubt, or is it a chip on your shoulder? I mean, I carry that chip on my shoulder all the time. A 10th round pick, a black hockey player. I always felt like I had to be better than everyone else. Whether that was real or not, in my mind, that was the case. And I could point out a bunch of different instances over the course of my career where that was definitely the case. Do you see it exactly the same way? Do you feel like there's the pressure that you constantly have to be better than just your average broadcaster on television?
I would say my answer to that is it depends on the personality. I really feel sometimes that, even me being Canadian, I've always been so patriotic, so passionate that Canada is, one of the most multicultural nations in the world. We're open and tolerant. But then there have been instances where I've experienced the opposite sentiment even within Canada. And I feel like what it is for me is it's always having the sentiment of trying to prove yourself as being Canadian, even to justify your Canadianness. Because I'll give you an example that I receive often this situation. But until just this last month or so, I didn't realize the impact that it would have. But let's say I'm at a grocery store, at a home hardware type of a store, and I end up chatting with a random stranger about a product, and they'll, the conversation keeps going, and they'll say, "Hey, where are you from?" And I say, "I'm from Canada." And then they're like, "Well, hold on a second, where are you really from?" And I'm like, "No, I'm really from Canada. Like, I'm born here in a small town near Edmonton, Wetaskiwin," and I try to provide, concrete, specific details. And they're like, "But wait, you don't even have an accent, right?" And so those are the types of situations. And then when I learned my great grandfather came here over 100 years ago, that was something I kept in my back pocket. It was revolutionary for me, because someone who said, "Go back to where you came from," I all of a sudden had something to tell them, that my family's history might even be in this country longer than yours. Like, we might have a more of a connection to Canada than the person who was saying that to me. The unfortunate thing is, sometimes I received this type of these comments at hockey games, that, someone would say derogatory, or, link me and my turban and my beard to some sort of event going on in the world that I had nothing to do with. And those types of incidents even happened within the world of sports. So I would say I've always had this thing where I've had to prove myself just to belong first in my country, and say I've had to wear it on my sleeve. Like, I grew up, my bedroom window had a Canadian flag. And now if I think back, why is that? It's because I felt like I had to prove my Canadianness more than the next Canadian who just looked like the majority. So those are some of the things that, when you're growing up, you have to go through, and you almost don't even realize why till now when we're reflecting on it.
Well, that's a classic case of privilege, right? We keep talking about privilege, and, if someone's grown up in Canada and they're white and they say they're Canadian, they don't have to prove, well, are they from England? Are they from Czech Republic? Like, where are they from? Are they from Ireland? No, it's understood they're from Canada. So there isn't be any reason why they should have to question your family background. If you say you're from Canada, you're Canadian, then you're Canadian. And there's nothing should change about that. But your great-grandfather, I believe he came to Canada and he went back to India, and then your dad came?
That's right. And from what I've gathered from the stories, and when you actually look at what the prime ministers during the time frame that my great-grandfather would have been in Canada, what was being said at that time from the parliament about trying to promote a white Canada and not wanting foreigners to come and infiltrate the society, and all those things, it's disheartening. And it wouldn't have been a very welcoming place. The Kamagata Maru was a ship from India. People in India thought that Canada and India, being part of the Commonwealth, the way the rules were supposed to work, you were supposed to be able to come and go freely from all of the countries in the Commonwealth. But they didn't realize that they risked their lives, spent how many months on a ship, and came over to Canada looking for work, but they didn't realize that they weren't going to be welcomed here. And that specific ship, people died, and then they sent that ship back to India, and the Canadian government eventually not so long ago, had to apologize for that event. But that was the same time frame that my great-grandfather came to Canada, and so he did eventually go back because he just didn't feel welcome enough and didn't feel comfortable enough. And then my parents, being teachers, and there was such a demand for teachers here in the 1960s, they eventually came to Canada, and they had their own different types of struggles as well. And so it's a long-lasting connection to this country, but it's crazy that it takes something like this, that what we've seen now happen, starting with George Floyd's murder, and then everything that's happened since there. It takes something like that for us to be able to kind of talk about these conversations more, or have these conversations more often.
I always say family is the most important thing, especially within the game of hockey. And the reason why I asked you that about your great-grandfather is because after he came and he was mistreated and he went back to India, your dad still felt that he should still come to Canada and settle in Canada and raise his family. And you think part of that's been passed down to you as being someone that's a quote-unquote non-traditional looking person that loves the game of hockey, and there's no way you're going to get pushed out. Like, I was exactly the same way. My parents said my strength of being stubborn is a blessing and it's a curse. Like, no one's going to tell me what I don't want to hear. So I'd have to say the same thing would apply to you and your family, that your dad would have known what your great-grandfather went through, but he still chose to come to Canada and set up shop. And then with you as an extension of that, working in the hockey business and the hockey world that hasn't always been that inclusive.
Yeah, and I think, like, for my parents, they initially came here thinking that they would work 10, 15 years or for a certain time frame and eventually go back. But they actually did fall in love with this country, and you know, it felt like home after they came here. So it's fascinating because, you know, they have some incredible stories where it was their first ever Halloween and they had no idea what to do or what to expect. And my dad's teaching at the high school already in the town of Brooks, and, you know, comes home and tells my mom that apparently we have to give something out to kids or something good. And she started apparently cooking something. And but, you know, in the midst of their kind of bewilderment of trying to learn what the new culture was here, or the new realms and norms, their house got egged in the meantime too. And so it's kind of like, I've always felt this too, you know, like there's a story that I just came to mind where a salesman came to our house in Brooks, and after talking to me, said, well, I just wanted to say welcome to Canada. And you know, it's those types of moments where it's like, you realize that we still have a long ways to go. And that's why this is so important, that what you're doing, the diversity initiative from Evander Kane, Akeem Alou, and all the NHL players, having Kim Davis in such a big role with the NHL. Everything, it matters and is so important for us to kind of relay the message that, you know, we're all one. Humanity is together. It doesn't matter how we look on the outside. On the inside, we're actually all the same species. And I think what's crazy is that, Anson, when I've gone on TV, sometimes now I've had the opportunity to go on the English side, and even though those comments are in the minority, they still stand out. And so many people say, don't let them bother you. And I try not to let them bother me, but that doesn't mean I won't forget them. And, you know, if I got a tweet that said, oh, I don't want my hockey coming to me from a guy in a turban, even though I didn't let it bother me at the time, because there was actually a lot of positivity too, I still haven't forgotten that. And I want to try to change that narrative. I want to be able to, you know, come and just talk about hockey. And so that someone might be able to just think that, hey, oh, wow, that's really cool. Like, this guy is, yeah, he looks different, but he seems just as Canadian, or just as, you know, American, and he's talking the sport and loves it and participates in it. And that's been one of the great stories about Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi too, where we've been able to show people that, you know, we want to grow the game, we want to participate in the game, and there's so many benefits of reaching out, branching out, and doing things that are kind of initiatives that are diverse.
Well, you started out on radio, you took that leap of faith to be on television, and now you're writing a book. I want to hear more about this book that you're writing. Is it a see-all, tell-all, expose? Like, what is it exactly?
The book's called One Game at a Time, and it's you know, it's our hockey cliche. Whenever, I'm sure you've said it too, Anson, in intermission interviews, but one game at a time is a great analogy for my career. I felt that, you know, Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi, it was a miracle that even began, and that's how I got my foot in the door. And now we've been able to swing that door more wider open, and we have what the show was at the beginning to what it's become now 13 seasons in is incredible. But the impact of the show, but I also touch on my personal life, my family's history, how my hockey, my love for hockey and passion for it grew into this dream. And so the book talks about all of that. And then we come to, you know, there's incidents on 9/11. I was in high school in Brooks, Alberta when 9/11 happened, and I experienced a traumatic racist incident at that time. I talk about those types of things, but I also, there's a lot of funny moments too, because I'm one of those guys where it's just like, you could make a sitcom about me, because, you know, through my travels at the airports and stuff, like the most randomest stuff will happen to me. Or my first day on the job with CBC Radio, where I had the CBC vehicle almost on fire. And so there's a lot of that. But then I also talk about Don Cherry and the comments that were made recently by him on Coach's Corner. And, you know, there's a lot in there. It's a lot of hockey, but it's also, you know, talking about my journey as well. And it's coming out in September and available on Amazon or through Chapters Indigo. But it's called One Game at a Time, and it's available for pre-order right now.
Well, you've been on fire this whole interview, and I usually take it one shift at a time, one game at a time. Here in hockey culture, we're trying to change the game one interview at a time. Harnarayan, thank you very much. I appreciate taking your time. Looking forward to this book coming out. We'll have to make sure I have another conversation with you when the book does come out, because I'm sure there's a lot more we could dive into at that time. Thank you for taking the time for having this conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for doing this. I applaud the efforts, and you know, I really think it will make a difference.
Thank you.